some embedded hyperlinks in the presentation as well that link to some of these resources. But if I mention anything today and you can't get it from the presentation, well, my email address will also be on that PDF. Again, Price is Right. Happy to help. Just shoot me a question. Always here. I always like to, when I'm giving a presentation for a new group, this one's always kind of a funny thing to start with. I apologize if y'all seen this a million times and you know it already. And I won't read it out to you. I know you can read. I'll read the question. What's the oldest known law or code that contained language related to construction? I didn't have Patrick input the poll, but just briefly read through it and think about when you think it may be. And obviously most of you are probably already thinking G. Well, I read through it all by now, and I'm assuming if all of y'all are engineers, then you probably read it quicker than me. And the answer is E, almost 3,800 years old. We could just give COs a permit if read code 229 there. If a builder built a house for someone and doesn't construct it properly and the house falls in and kills the owner, then the builder shall be put to death. If it said builder/designer on there, we would have buildings designed and built well, wouldn't we? We wouldn't even need to worry. We wouldn't have construction inspectors if we were still doing this. But let's go ahead and get started. The 2021, I'm sure many of you remember that jump from the 09. So this is the energy use on the left here. And we're working our way to net zero by 2030, hopefully down here, which you can see we've got a long way to go. And at the rate we're going, we will never get there. The energy efficiency advocates are up in arms over this and really driving stringent code proposals forward. And of course, the building owner and builder side is crying foul the entire way. And as always, you know, with most things in life, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, no doubt. But that big, we took about a 12 to 15% jump from the 09 to the 12 was pretty significant. And those of you that don't know, I'm assuming everybody does, but ASHRAE 90.1 comes out prior to, so the ASHRAE 90.1 2019, that's what the 2021 energy codes model after. So the ASHRAE 90.1 comes out 2 years earlier, and the IECC more and more has been trying to align itself with a lot of what's in 90.1, and the 2021 is no exception. You'll hear me say 4 or 5 times during the presentation today, this aligns with 90.1, because that more and more with more of the tables and more of the requirements, more of the definitions, they're trying to align the two more and more. But you'll see here, you know, from the 09 to the 12, we took a big efficiency jump, 12, 15, 18, which I would imagine most, you know, those of you in Corpus are working on the 15. Those of you, most 92% of Texas municipalities are on the 12, 15, or 18, which is darn near the same code. The 18 is about 1% more efficient, but quite literally almost the same. Well, in 2021, we get about an 8-9% efficiency jump. And so with that kind of jump in efficiency, needless to say, there will be a handful, at least a handful of new requirements. I typically live in the residential world. It's so much simpler. When I give out code books at live in-person presentations, I always joke, you know, if nothing else, if you're having trouble sleeping, just open the commercial chapter and you'll be out in 2 minutes. They just don't make it the easiest to read or understand. Every time I read the Skylight requirements in the 2015, I come away with a new interpretation of what actually is required, which, hey, they cleaned that up in the 2021 a little bit, so yay. So let's get on to the changes. Screen here. Oh, just real quick, just so you know, on the ICC, it is no longer, the energy code is no longer being developed like the IBC and the plumbing code and the mechanical code. It is now changing to a standard. And I hope I'm real hopeful for this. I think this is a better thing because I want a smaller group cleaning this up and making it less complicated. And so going forward, and everyone can still be involved. You have until October 12th. If you have any code change proposals, you have until October 12th to submit those. But it is now a standard committee type process for development of the energy code, starting with the 2024. As far as how Texas deals with this, for those of you that don't know, well, the Health and Safety Code, Section 388, basically says, hey, we have a state energy conservation office. Hey, state energy conservation office, clean up our air quality. And excuse me, those of you in Corpus know, you were designated as a non-attainment area. So technically you can't even, or couldn't, I think you might, that designation may have changed. I know it changed in Victoria. I'm not sure about Corpus, but I can find out if you need to know that. But long story short, House Bill or Health and Safety Code 388 says SECO clean up our air, and for SECO to clean up our air, we have to charge Texas A&M's Energy Systems Laboratory to examine the energy code and provide stringency analysis. Well, that was actually the way the legislation is written. The energy code was published in 2021. So Energy Systems Lab had 6 months to do stringency analysis. So that's done. They've determined it's more stringent. So now the ball's in SECO's court, which normally at this time, SECO would be recommending the 2021 to the legislature for adoption as the minimum energy code in Texas. However, House Bill 2439, the attorney for SECO, counsel for SECO, has determined that 2439, which was simply meant to keep cities from mandating masonry. It was, the siding and the wood siding and the hardy and the vinyl siding. The manufacturers that don't make brick and stone got together and put a bug in Representative Phelan's ear and said, hey, we don't want to be prohibited from using this cheaper material. And long story short, House Bill 2439 was signed into, is now on the books. And so SECO is kind of at this stakeholder process point right now. They will be taking comments on the 2021, but they will not be publishing a new rule and sending this to legislature for adoption until we've actually met with Senator Phelan's or Representative Phelan's administrators and are trying to clear this up for SECO to help move the 2021 forward. But as it is right now, at the very earliest for a statewide mandate, we'd be looking at August 2022. I'm thinking that it'd be 2023 at the very earliest, in my opinion. I know people at all of these agencies and talk to them regularly. Not going to be anytime soon. However, I know, I've been working with Luke Fry there in Corpus. We've been looking at the 2021 already. I know he's wanting to move forward. I think after the first of the year is what he's looking at. And Victoria's moving to the 2021. Austin's already, as of September 1st, Austin's already on the 2021. So jurisdictions across the state will be moving before the state as a whole will. That's just letting you know that this is the minimum of the 2015 has been effective since fall of 2016. Okay, now here's the meat of it here. What are the changes? Well, let's look. Well, here's the list of proposed changes, a little over 300 and something of them. That's another nice reason to, I think, get this thing to a committee. I think they'll be able to get through some of this and weed out some of the junk quicker. What made it through were 114 changes in total. This pie chart on the left here tells you of the 114 changes, what they do. Most of them save energy. actually the vast majority of them, 58%, are administrative, dotted an I, crossed a T, changed a few wordings in a definition, whatever it may be. But as far as actual energy impact, it's less than half. These two pie charts on the right here, there were a total of 36 building envelope proposals that were approved for the 2021. And that's how the presentation will kind of be laid out. We'll look at envelope and then mechanical and then lighting. You just kind of in the order of the way the code book goes. The nice thing about it is this is still in there, which is, hey, architect, engineer. Well, I mean, what I would advise you is don't try to build the cheapest building you can possibly build, but build the building you want to build, put it in ComCheck and see how close you are. You might be surprised at exactly what you want to build is already 1% above code or 2% above code. And if you put it in ComCheck and hit submit and you're 19% below code, or you're 19% short, you're 19% below code, well, then you need to make some major changes. You put it in there, click submit, and you're 1 or 2% below code. That's a pretty easy fix. Then you can start looking at cost. Well, you're always looking at cost, I'm sure, as an engineer, but depending on how far away you are. But again, it's one nice thing about the energy code. It really is flexible. You can rob Peter to pay Paul all day long. I can tell you in the calculations, I'm sure all of you know that, the thermal bridging aspects of steel frame construction, metal studs, depending on any kind of, you're going to need some continuous insulation to stop that thermal bridging. So just don't try to build a metal building without continuous insulation, but just look at the prescriptive values, kind of use those in the back of your head for baselines, build the building you want to build, put it in ComCheck. I saw there's some issues with ComCheck, and that's probably underestimating it, but it's a simple tool, and you all use it. I know when I was building official, every single project I ever permitted or inspected except one was built under ComCheck. Down in Corpus, you will have some greater than 40% fenestration buildings, so you will move to the performance path. So you will get on some of those buildings, you will need a more sophisticated calculator, but 99 out of 100 buildings, just put them in ComCheck and see where you're at. The layout is the same in the IECC, nothing changed as far as just scope and administration, then your definitions, requirements, and then finishing up with standards and appendices. All that's the same. To keep in mind, this building here, imagine this is quite the crude drawing here, but imagine this is a 3-story building. We've got, there's a lot of these mixed use buildings coming in now where you have retail on the first floor, apartments on the second and third. So remember, 4 stories and above, it's always out of the commercial chapter of the energy code. 3 stories and below, it depends. These apartments, you would actually build out of the residential chapter of the energy code, and the retail space on the first floor would be built out of the commercial chapter. So that's how that works. Those of you, if the majority of you are building in Corpus, I just highlighted a few important sentences out of the scope and administration chapter. This one here, Luke Fry is a real reasonable guy. If you have a building or a use or something that the code is wanting you to do something that just frankly doesn't make sense in Corpus Christi, and you can make a good argument to, hey, the intent of the code is to save energy. The way I want to do, here's what the code says, here's how I want to do it. That's not allowed, but can't we all agree that this meets the intent of the code? Well, this code is intended to provide flexibility to permit the use of those approaches and techniques. So always keep that in mind. If you really get hung up with something in the code, go to your code official, and you might be able to, I always, especially on the existing buildings chapter, you just can't make existing, especially, a 100-year-old building in downtown Corpus that's been sitting there vacant for 20 years, to have to add an inch of foam on that beautiful mass wall to make it comply. Well, you really want to keep that look of the mass wall on the inside and out, well, maybe we can just do hyper efficient mechanicals, or maybe, maybe that might not meet the letter of the law of the code, but hyper efficient mechanicals and leaving the aesthetics and the design of the mass wall, that's something that I had to allow regularly. I didn't have to allow, and that's the code says I couldn't, but your code official will have that ability to make some of those common sense decisions. And I know Luke's pretty sharp and would be willing to work with you there. I already talked about residential and commercial there. And just keep in mind, if you ever are submitting at a jurisdiction and they ask for you as, hey, I'm an engineer and you want me to go take this open book out 90-minute ICC commercial test to get my ICC certification. Are you kidding me? Just keep in mind the way the legislation is written, it can definitely be interpreted that way. And there are also, additionally, there is a section in the code that that specifically allows jurisdictions to have the registered design professionals fill out those comm checks. So kind of a two-way street there. You could be required to fill out the comm check, and then also you could be required to have your IECC commercial certifications. As a code official, I've been a big fan of the energy code, since back 15 years ago when I was a building official. And whenever I would ask for additional, I would get that comm check and it would say R19 in the walls. And then I'd show a 3.5-inch wall. Well, obviously an R13. In other words, if I ever got a pencil whipped comm check, this is what the code requires as far as the details related to the energy code. If I ever got a crummy set of plans, I always came back with this, give me the full list. If you're going to try to put one over on me, that's fine. Give me the full list. I know the city of Houston these days, Steve Stelzer, I saw he's actually on the call. He's done a tremendous job with increasing energy code compliance. And your comm checks with the city of Houston now will be filled out to the T. And I'm talking about letting the plan reviewers know what page of the plans all of these details are on. I mean, they want every I dotted and every T crossed. The nice thing about ComCheck though, is it gives you it prints out that checklist. But I mean, most of the time you just get NA or some sort of pencil whipping on the checklist as a permit or as a plan reviewer. But if you'll take your time to fill out that ComCheck thoroughly, it'll really go a long way at permit. A couple of new ones are in red. Your energy compliance path, which is, typically you're either going to be, over 40% fenestration, you're going to be performance. You might be 90.1. I very rarely see 90.1 projects. This, and we'll get to some additional air barrier requirements in the presentation, but that air barrier and air sealing details, including the location of the air barrier, needs to be on the plans now. And you need to get it on the plans because it's a whole lot pickier now. And there's a lot of jurisdictions you're going to be blower door testing commercial projects now. So having the crews out there with a good set of plans, getting a good air seal, you don't want to be a week away from CO tracking down air leaks. That's a pain. I kind of bolded the location of daylight zones on the floor plans just to kind of highlight one area. I apologize, it's a little blurry, but just making the plan reviewer's job simpler helps expedite your permit. It just does. So, calling out the daylight zones, where are they? What's the wattage in that daylight zone? What's required? So just having those notes and having, exempt per in the code sections, that will grease your permit. I'm telling you, it'd be worth your time on the front end to get a little more detail on the construction documents. These are new definitions. I'm not going to read these or anything, but just interesting or not interesting. We're not going to do a bunch of biogas or biomass here in Texas, I'm guessing, but as more and more buildings have more and more servers in them, There is now a data center designation versus a computer room, and it has to do with watts per square foot. There's additional data center system and requirements for data center. So it will be not, it will probably be fairly common that a non-data center, that what used to be a computer room in a building will now qualify as a data center and will have some additional requirements. So that's why I kind of highlighted that one there. And then there's a whole handful of additional control requirements coming in with the 2021. Fan requirements, a handful, there's 3 different new fan definitions in the code. And more that you're going to be encouraged to do some renewable energy. So, you know, you'll probably want to be keeping in mind solar for a lot of projects these days. And then enthalpy recovery ratio, also a new definition. So there's some significant changes here. So, you know, this just comes straight out of chapter 3. And, you know, I'm sure you've all seen a climate zone map, but the gist of it is, hey, we don't need to build buildings in Montana like we do in Corpus, right? And so we're in climate zone 2A, which is, hey, it's hot and humid. Some interesting changes though to this map. So in the 2015 code, this was an IECC specific map. And starting in the 2018 energy code, the ASHRAE map has been referenced. So now ASHRAE has control, since 2018, ASHRAE has control of the climate zone map in the IECC. Well, with the 2021, it's getting warmer. And I'm sure many of you will have projects, and actually it will get easier to design projects in Cameron, Hidalgo, and Willacy County, because those 3 counties down in the valley are going to climate zone 1, significantly less requirements for climate zone 1. Those of you that do work in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Dallas County, Tarrant, Navarro, Johnson, Ellis are all moving from climate zone 3 to climate zone 2. Again, it'll be easier to design and build in those kind of. Now, I certainly encourage everybody to go ahead and beef it up and design it so that it would comply in both climate zones. But just to let you know, 7 of those climate zones are changing just because it's getting warmer. So what's new? There is now, this has always been required in residential. It's an energy efficiency certificate. This is now required in commercial. You're basically, hey, what's in this building thermal envelope? What are our values? Wall, floor, ceiling. What's our U factor, solar heat gain of our fenestration? You use area weighted average if you have more than one, and results of the building envelope air leakage testing. So that's coming. And this, I believe the code says this would be in the mechanical room is where you will post this. And just in case, I'm not going to read this, so this is related to this U factor and solar heat gain coefficient. You know, the code says your fenestration shall be labeled. Well, the only time you get a label on a window is a residential window. The NFRC, that's the only time you'll see an NFRC label, right? Because you buy the components for commercial jobs because it's site built. Well, this language, and again, you'll get a PDF of this. Long story short, I've got a buddy of mine that's an engineer with NFRC, and this is his verbiage as far as how to get a certificate. So if you ever have a code official wanting that label, this gives you the language you need to go to that code official and to go to the fenestration manufacturer and get what it is that you need for fenestration compliance for the energy code. So prescriptive table changes, you know, energy codes, it's all based on the prescriptive table. If you do the mandatory items and you meet the minimum requirements in the prescriptive table, you're 99% of the way there, right? Well, if you look here, the blue is new. So in climate zone 2 and 3 in Texas, actually nothing new on insulation above roof deck. We're going from 38 to 49 up in Amarillo, but not a whole lot of changes thus far in the prescriptive tables. Here's those apartments. this will be interesting, and I will be curious. I noticed that this was broke as far as how ResCheck calculates this. Supposedly, the Pacific Northwest National Lab is getting those calculations fixed. I haven't been notified that they are fixed yet, but there could be, this is a mandatory quote unquote requirement for unheated slabs, group R, climate zone 3. We're now doing R10 on slabs. This is a new requirement, and there's language describing how to install the insulation. I think I have that on the next slide. And then there's some modification to the F factors to align with the ASHRAE standards. And I put this on here. This is what it says as far as the insulation installation on the slab. And this hyperlink here is an additional good resource as far as you're needing some details as far as, in Texas, we're obviously not doing frost protection. Me personally, I don't think this makes a lot of sense. I think the efficiency folks got a win. They didn't need to get there, but that's just my opinion. I mean, in a climate zone 3 is primarily cooling dominated climate. I think slab insulation, it's more trouble than it's worth, but that's just my opinion. So quite a few changes to the U factors on fenestration. Not only are the U factors lowered, but before there was, swinging door was in the R table and hinge door was in the U table. And they've kind of cleaned that up, and they have 3 different categories now, and it's all in the U table now. It requires compliance with NFRC 100. And then as you read here, with glazing between 14 and 25, there's some additional requirements as far as partially glazed, and you see it's its own category as well. So those numbers have lowered. What I found traditionally is the fenestration manufacturers meeting code for fenestration is almost never an issue residentially. And I would anticipate that it's probably not a big issue commercially as well. Again, this is just some more of the lowered U and solar heat gain. And really what it's doing, it's aligning it with 90.1. And there was another change in the table. It used to have orientation and had different U's based on orientation. And they've switched that orientation to fixed and operable. And so there's different requirements, whether it's fixed or operable, rather than the orientation now. My gosh. Like I said, on the skylights, I could read it 5 times and get 5 different interpretations of what the requirements were. So I'm happy that they did remove some of the redundancy and tried to clarify some of where the exceptions are required. Really, there are very few exceptions. You're going to be putting skylights in buildings. You just are. So, be ready for it. I'm sure you already are. With a decent plan reviewer in the 2015, but you certainly will be with the 2021. And we've added visible transmittance. That's new in all the NFRC languages. And then there's also, if those of you that design schools, the energy code tells you you've got to have a skylight in a gym. Well, typically, and then the building code tells you you've got to have a storm shelter in a school. Well, where's the best place to put the storm shelter? The gym. Duh. Why? So I've got to have a skylight in my storm shelter. Well, those of you down in hurricane areas know that makes 0 sense. So there's they cleaned up that exception. If you've got that, you designed that gym and it complies with IECC 500. Most building officials with any sense would allow life safety to trump a little additional daylighting coming through the ceiling. But if you ever had any problems with any of them, that's now specifically outlined in the code. Yeah, that's just more of what I said. Now, this is absolutely as clear as mud, and I've only read through it twice. And so I'll probably have to read through it 42 more times before I get it 100% down. But the code says, and I have a feeling if you sent to ICC for an interpretation, this would actually, you would get a different interpretation from ICC than the intent of these code changes. I've already found that to be the case residentially, and I'll show you an example of a good place to go for that here at the end when I'm doing the resources. But looked at the code change proposal language, looked at but then saw this, or if it says the building thermal envelope shall comply with this or be tested, that tells me that testing isn't required. But the intent, the code change proposal, and I'm sure many code officials, and the first time you read it, it says it shall be tested. So again, this is going to be clear as mud, and this is going to be from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I would get with the code official first thing. But anyway, you want a good air barrier, and that air barrier is going to help with moisture intrusion. It's going to help with other issues that you don't want to be you don't want your seal on the hook for down the line anyway. So designing and speccing a good air barrier is a good practice anyway. Here's the maximum leakage. And there's some exemptions based on building size and type, and it jumps all around which climate zone the exemptions are and how the square footage is. And then the code goes on to say, well, if you don't meet the provisions, you can do back in the 2015 code, there was a materials or assembly list that qualified as your air barrier. Like, what was it, like 12 materials and 7 assemblies or whatever it was. Well, now, again, this isn't clear at all. And I'm sure I will have 5 different interpretations sent off to ICC about this in the next 6 months. And so I'll know a whole lot more about this coming up. But it's, this is just still at that clear as mud stage. But there is an exception, basically says, hey, if you use the material or assembly, you got an inspection, you had it on the plan review, and you get a commissioning report of your air barrier, you should be able to get by with that. But again, that's not what it says when I read it. It says it has to be tested, but it is clear as mud. Again, it's getting pickier about air barriers. You're probably going to be speccing a whole lot of fluid applied membranes on buildings moving forward, just because it's just going to be easier and you're going to have a better chance of passing your air barrier. And frankly, it specifically calls it out with some of the ASTM standards that it specs. So the gist, it's getting pickier about air barriers, and you're probably going to be blower door testing a lot of buildings. There's a new thing about airspaces. Basically, you use that ASHRAE handbook of fundamentals, and an airspace, still air. I mean, that's what, it's not the fiberglass and fiberglass that insulates. It's the little bitty air spaces in there that are sealed that do the insulation. Well, there's actually, you can add the R value to if you have air spaces. Keep in mind that airflow has got to be minimized, and it has to be on the interior side of that continuous air barrier, which would be another reason, another bonus of that fluid applied air barrier on the exterior. That air and water barrier. I'm a big fan of those. Help a lot of sloppy construction practices as far as sealing that up. So this is onto the mechanical. There were 21 mechanical service water heating performance and energy credit changes. The majority of them were just to align with 90.1 and or as the federal minimums for equipment efficiency get updated over the years. All of that goes straight into the energy code. So a handful of those 2021s were just simply changes to reflect the federal minimum efficiencies. But you see the breakdown there. Again, controls, you'll see this over and over. That's a pretty big theme. In this energy credit section, yeah, I'm a tree hugging hippie working for an energy efficiency nonprofit, but just when you make it more complicated than it needs to be, it turns people off from the code, and that's exactly what this section does. However, I guess, once we learn it and get the hang of it, no, then the code will change. But I'm sure once you learn it and get the hang of it, it's probably not too complicated after all. Everybody loves these buildings. I know one of these days I want to own my restaurant, and I love eating outdoors when the weather, almost year round in Texas. because I like the heat. But there are now any large doors larger than 40 square feet. Those have to be interlocked to your heating and cooling system. And there's the gist of this is these maximum temperatures here, but you're no longer, it's always annoying to me to, be in a restaurant with those doors and it's 72 degrees in here, just blasting chilled air out into the 95-degree outside. So the energy code has fixed that. And it shall occur within 10 minutes of that thing opening. So it has to be interlocked, controlled, tied in. Over 100,000 feet for buildings, you are going to have fault detection and diagnostics on your HVAC system. That is pretty sophisticated. I mean, as you see, I'll give you a second to read those 6 things that it has to be capable of doing. Yep. More and more controls, more and more smart buildings. And, as technology is getting easier and better and cheaper, it makes sense because you can save a whole lot of energy just by making sure that your economizer is not stuck wide open in August, getting those fault detections, sampling that HVAC system performance every 15 minutes and sending a report. Over 100,000 square feet, that's what they're going to have. We saw those additional fan definitions. There's additional new efficiency requirements for small fans. They just need to be more efficient. Most of your, those cheap builder grade bathroom exhaust fans aren't going to work anymore. They'll need to be an Energy Star. I mean, they're $90 instead of $40. It's not a huge cost increase, but more efficient fans and more fan categories and definitions have made it into the code in the 2021. Demand controlled ventilation. We'll be doing that now in retail, and occupant density. We'll be doing it in more buildings now because occupant density has been reduced from 25 to 15 people per 1,000 square feet. Now has to have demand controlled ventilation. End of day system turns off. That optimized stop schedule adjustment, that's a new addition. Variable refrigerant flow no longer requires outside air economizers. And this is something, so this table right here, this is from the 2018 code. But just so you know, the 2015 code was broken. They should have issued an errata, but they didn't. It was exactly backwards of what it needed to be. Any of you mechanical engineers know that in Corpus Christi, in my opinion anyway, and I'm sure most of yours, putting an economizer on HVAC system is dumb. But in the 2015 code, it didn't have climate zone 2A, 3A, and 4A. It only allowed more efficient equipment in the dry climates, which obviously it should have been exactly backwards. If you're going to mandate economizers, you should mandate them in dry climates, not humid climates, duh. And so that was broken in the 15 code. So if any of you are designing mechanical systems in climate zone 2 or 3A in Dallas, Houston, Corpus, wherever, and you don't want to put an economizer on there and you've always been made to, I know me as a code official and most code officials that use common sense and can apply it to the intent of the code, just let them know, hey, they fixed that. You were supposed to allow economizers in lieu of more efficient equipment. The 2018 code allows it. The 2021 code allows it. Me personally, as a code official, if it was in a newer code, I would always allow it. If I was on the 2012 and you wanted to do something out of the 2018, why wouldn't I allow that? So keep in mind, hey, economizers in Corpus, probably not the best idea, in my opinion. 10% more efficient equipment is going to save energy, and I'm a big fan of the intent of the code, which is to save energy. A few more HVAC control changes. Water loop heat pump rejection circulation pump shutdowns now required on closed circuit cooling towers. Parking exhausts, there have been some control adjustments on parking lot exhausts. Hotel guest rooms are getting more and more picky. And you know, frankly, in August in Texas, when you walk into that hotel guest room and it's 64 degrees, it's probably been unoccupied for a week. You walk in at 64 degrees. It's been running at 64 all week when it's 100 outside. That needle, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that's a massive waste of energy. There's some new control requirements, and as more and more as newer hotels are getting built, you know, as you're checking in, your AC will start ramping down, or you could probably check in on the way. I mean, everything's going to be app controlled real soon, and so anyway, new requirements on hotel guest room temperature and ventilation controls. You got to have occupant sensor shutoffs now. You'll probably be doing like a whole lot of key card buildings, just, you know, where you put your room key inside the door so you can turn the lights on and turn the AC on. But who wants to walk into a hotel room after sweating in the, you know, walking 100 yards through a parking lot, and when it's 100 degrees and you get to your room and it's 80? Ugh. So I see both sides of that one, but keeping it 64 in the summer in Texas makes no sense. ERVs, oh boy, get ready. You're going to be installing them. And I've never installed one or maintained one. I've heard they are a pain as far as maintenance. I've also heard that the manufacturers are getting a lot better at making them more maintenance friendly. But CE 133, basically apartments over 500 square feet, you're doing ERVs. Now in Corpus, it's kind of nice because you're actually going to probably be able to make a room more comfortable by lowering the relative humidity in the room. The ERV should help that. So, you know, that'll all kind of play in together. Not a terrible idea, but I don't know. Anyway, I've heard their maintenance issues, but you'll be putting them in. Chill or heat recovery now required for hospitals. The performance path. So any of you doing those big high-rise glass buildings, used to you had to be 85% of the baseline building. Now you need to be 20% more efficient. So you can only be 80% of the baseline building. That's probably a significant portion of that 8% savings that the 2021 is bringing in, is just right there in that performance requirement. Large boilers. Service water heating over 1 million BTUs an hour. System efficiency increases to 92%. You know, back in the 2015, you had that additional efficiency option, right? And you had one of 6 options. And lighting power, the lighting power requirement was, you know, with LEDs, you were already there. The good thing is that's still available in the 2021. So I'm guessing 99% of projects will go there. However, they've really, this section used to be a paragraph with the 6 options. This section is now 12 pages long. And it's a little complicated, but you're probably going to be doing that 10% lighting power density is probably still going to be what you're going with. It's based on a menu item now, and it's based on what. So these are the climate zones. These are the code sections, and it's based on 10 points. You need to get to 10 points. Well, depending on what climate zone you're in and what code section for additional efficiency you want to use, yeah, that's part of the 12 pages, right? There's a few additional here. Kitchen equipment needs to be more efficient now. This is, and again, but this is for your additional efficiency credits. Here's just an example of the six of the 12 pages are tables, which basically tells you how many points you get for doing whatever code section suggestion based on climate zone. So that's kind of how it works. A whole lot more metering and monitoring. We mentioned that. Energy monitoring, any building over 25,000 square feet, it's going to need to be pretty sophisticatedly, I don't even think that's a word. It will need to be, the control mechanisms for that building will need to be fairly sophisticated because it needs to include all 6 of these things. You know, just kind of depending on what the load is, you know, is it interior, exterior lighting, is it HVAC? It's going to be metered, monitored, and reported. There's a whole lot more requirements related to this and controls. Receptacles. You'll be buying a whole lot of these bad boys. And I put one in my outdoor cantina bar I built in my backyard this summer. These things are great. These little Wi-Fi plugs, these are awesome. Well, 50% of all your 20 amp receptacles in most commercial buildings, you see the list there, they will need to be automatically controlled. People aren't in the room, those plugs shut off. We're wanting to reduce a lot of those phantom plug loads, a lot of that just power going to nowhere for nothing. You see some of the other requirements here. You know, there's a few exceptions to the rule, and you're probably going to be hardwiring some equipment in because any plug-in devices don't count. They would need to be hardwired, or the plugs. Again, 50% of those plugs are going to have to be controlled. And again, you see some of the additional requirements there. Lighting proposals, you know, back when the 2012 came along, really, you just, if you're willing to switch to all LEDs at the time, you were there. Well, that low-hanging fruit, you know, the efficiency advocates like myself and those at the code change hearings, you know, hey, low-hanging fruit isn't good enough anymore. There were 19 building lighting proposals that made it in for the 2021. 13 of them were controls. Again, that's the same thing. More controls, more sophisticated buildings. You see how they break down here. Let's kind of look at a few of them. All the tables were changed. The lighting power density tables were changed. Actually, some of them were increased. Most of them were decreased. Typically, you don't see an issue with that with LEDs. It's typically not an issue. And just keep in mind, if you're doing a shell, you've got to do the space by space method, not the building area method. So it breaks down core and shell buildings and adds some specifications and modifies all the lighting power density tables. They've all been modified. There's some daylighting changes. I was looking for pictures of daylighting and came across this. How cool is that? To be bringing in daylighting and have a prismatic diffuser having, you know, meeting your daylighting requirements at the same time as sprucing up the building, making it look cool. I thought I'd throw that on there. But it just changes some areas. And here in the next couple of months, I have a lighting sales rep that is super knowledgeable on all the daylighting and lighting control requirements in the code. Again, if you're on my email list, when we run that webinar, he'll probably do 2 hours on nothing but daylighting and lighting controls, and he's good. So make sure to get on the email list if you want to catch that. I'm going to do 45 seconds on it. You know, it's just basically change some definitions on side lighting and top lighting zones. Even in daylighting zones now, you're going to have controls to dim the lights a little differently than the 2015's done. A handful of other items of note: parking garage lighting. There's additional controls. Of course, we already talked about that. Occupancy sensors. They've added more areas. Warehouse aisles have to be independently controlled with occupancy sensors. Additional manual override controls are now required. Again, general lighting. There's enhanced controlled requirements. They did add some decorative exemptions that weren't there, decorative lighting exemptions that weren't there in the 2015. And then additional dimming requirements on exterior lighting, depending on wattage and height. These are all hyperlinks, super handy guides. These commissioning, I'll show you those. I won't get to all these because we are right at an hour. I've got about 5 more minutes on the resources, and then we'll do Q&A. Let me show you some of those resources real quick. So we've got those of you that haven't been on the new ICC codes. It's pretty handy. If you're reading a code section and you can't make sense of it, move your mouse over this and you can actually click on the code proposal. And here's what the code proposal looks like. And this is, like I said, I've been to the bottom of all of these on the residential. I haven't started submitting to ICC for interpretations on the commercial yet. I quite literally just finished this presentation at about 11 o'clock today. So it's, 6 months from now, it'll be a lot better. But if you read something and it's confusing, this has the original code change proposal, the reasoning of it. And then what I like about it is, heck, I can email the people and ask them, what were you thinking? What does this really mean? So that's super handy. And that's the new ICC digital codes, super handy. These are the supplemental files for commissioning. These checklists, and my buddy Jerry Kettler wrote half of these, but super handy checklists. I mean, again, expediting permits, probably very beneficial for a lot of your projects. And man, just kill the permit office with all the checklists. And as far as commissioning goes, I mean, this covers everything. Designer, engineer roles and responsibilities checklist. I mean, everything to do about commissioning, and these are all free documents, just hyperlinks, bam. You can click on it and you're good to go there. A couple other handy items, and I stole these from City of San Antonio, was nice enough to give me these. Basically, and these aren't included in the presentation, but just shoot me an email if you want them. I give these to city officials all the time. The red is just for the city to go in and put their logo and their name of the department. But as an engineer, I would use this as well. Basically, again, it's going to make the plan review staff's job so much easier, because it talks about, hey, now this is for the 2015, but it's fairly easily amended to the 2021. I'll probably have that done within the next handful of months. But it calls out what's required where, okay? And then the energy system, one owner buildings are, hey, is it multi-use? What has to be done where? When's it done? Is it at the shell, the finish out? How does that have to be? And it's just a checklist. And hey, are we using ICC or ASHRAE? And this kind of helps guide you through the building design energy code compliance process, kind of all in one step through checklists. And I'm not going to go through it, very detailed here, but just kind of scrolling through it, giving you the gist of what all this does. I mean, it goes, hey, we've got what's required here. Provide the R value of this, this, and this. It gives you the code section in IECC and 90.1, and it's got comments on it. A pretty handy checklist there. That would be a good one for a new project. And then this would be the last one. This is letting the plan reviewer know, because frankly, the com check only goes so far, and it has as many holes in it as Swiss cheese, that I'm coming to find out. Now, granted, it's useful and it's the best we've got, and man, it's a heck of a lot better than nothing. And it absolutely makes the world simpler for so many folks involved. However, it is missing quite a bit really as well. And so to be able to go through here and have all the code section, hey, roof, solar reflectance, and thermal admittance. Here's the code section. Did I check it? Yes. And to just, to give that plan reviewer the peace of mind that, hey, me, the engineer, I've double checked all these sections. I'm even willing to seal it, write my name on it, right? And then again, it's just kind of more checklists. Who gets what, as far as, hey, I want to clear my inspection. And a lot of times, if you're using a third-party energy inspector, get with them, and between you two, this makes life a whole lot easier. Hey, here's the systems. This is about systems, commissioning reports, and that's it, man. I'm only 3 minutes over. That was almost right on time. Looks like we do have a handful of questions.
Yeah, Jason, this is Patrick. I was going to see if you could, if you can see the chat box, and if you wanted to go through those real quick.
So who's going to fix ComCheck? We're working on it, Steve. We're working on it. I actually have a meeting with National Renewable Energy Lab trying to fix ResCheck tomorrow. So we're starting with ResCheck, and honestly, folks, Steve, people like you and me are going to have to fix ComChecks, because we're just going to have to keep sending them the problems to the help desk. How would you assign the roof? I'm not 100% sure. Sign the roof. I mean, to me, I'm just thinking R25. I don't know exactly what that means, Jeff. If you could clarify that or a little bit, or just shoot me an email, I'm happy to. Looks like some of these were specific to where I was. Again, on that PTAC requirement, Jeff, you're really probably just looking at those efficiency tables, meeting the minimum efficiency tables, which, most of the manufacturers are ahead of that on already because they're meeting those are federal requirements, and those had come out before 90.1.
He was,
that's a great question, Jonathan. Can the MEP pick between EER or IER/SEER on the 10% exemption, or must both of them meet? The code gives you absolutely no guidance on that. I've sent off to ICC there is no guidance in the code on that. So what I would say as the MEP, you can pick. The automatic receptacles are going in on, no, that's greater than 5,000 square feet were those automatic receptacles, and it would be commercial. So they will not be going into residential, but they were defeated going into residential in the 2021, Steve, and I bet they make it into the 2024. Mixed use. Yes, those PTACs will need to be tied into the controls for hotels. Absolutely. Yeah, it is. Yeah, a PTAC is no different than, it doesn't allow an exemption for the PTAC on the hotel occupancy. Ooh, I knew I was going to get a couple of questions that I would just have to say, I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up and get back to you on that one. I got lucky. I appreciate it. Well, and again, please shoot me an email and I'll type my email in the chat. Get on my email distribution list and be happy to, like I said, I mean, if you want 2 hours on daylighting and lighting controls, that'll be coming. Most of the webinars I do are residential, but we do a handful of commercial as well. So happy to get you on the email list. And like I said, you get maybe 1 email a month is all.
Fantastic. Let's see, we may have.
Oh, Steve's a troublemaker. Just ignore him. No, what we found, we found some. So, U factor, they're looking at the assembly. And whereas our value, it's just that straight cavity value or a continuous value. And, you're supposed to calculate, you go back to the appendix or the handbook of fundamentals and how do you do that? U is supposed to be just, just a reciprocal of the R, right? But it doesn't, we're finding more and more problems where the U is considerably more generous than the R. And Steve is an efficiency advocate that hates to see that allowance. And I don't blame him. It seems to be overly generous when you go to the U table rather than the R table. And it's just, we've been finding inconsistencies out the yin yang with that. But we're kind of on it and hoping to fix it going forward. So anyway, well, thanks everybody for joining us. I know, Steve. I know, I feel you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate your time. Thank you to everybody who attended. Keep an eye out for the next newsletter and presentation topic, and link to that presentation will be in a newsletter. That'll conclude the meeting.
Thanks, everybody.